Leila Navarro is a quiet, pragmatic woman used to being overlooked by co-workers, neighbors, even the man she married for security. After a humiliating encounter at an upscale car dealership where assumption and class prejudice force her out, she returns home wounded and resolute. The next day, her billionaire husband's Rolls-Royce appears at the curb. A spectacular provocation that upends the lives of everyone involved. What starts as a public vindication becomes a private reckoning. Leila must confront the limits of gratitude, the cost of performance, and the difference between being seen and being known. In a tale of dignity, power, and the small rebellions that reshape a life, this cinematic drama explores how love, money, and pride can be both weapons and healers, and how a simple woman can choose an extraordinary path. The dealership was all glass and reverence, a cathedral built for commerce. Light fell in precise rectangles across the polished floor, catching on the sculpted shoulders of machines, so glossy they seemed to have swallowed morning. Men in tailored suits walked like priests, palms folded around the kind of confidence you could buy with an account number. Women, where they stood, were framed like paintings, accessories to the gleam. Leila Navarro stood at the threshold with her grocery bag of tomatoes and a paper list of prices. Her blouse had a fainted sun print she'd ironed until the collar softened. Her shoes had been mended at last month's cobbler. She had come because the newspaper had printed a small, handsome advertisement. Open house. Test drives today. All models. For 2 weeks she had been saving, counting overtime and tips, shelving fantasies like plates in a pantry. She wanted to know, finally, what it felt like to be inside a place made for people who decided the world's contours and paid the bills before breakfast. A young man in a blazer with too much cologne approached, a smile like a flash of chrome. "Welcome," he said. His name badge read dark. He was practiced in the art of making anyone feel like a new patient at a clinic that treated wealth as a diagnosis. "Can I help you find something in particular?" Leila felt her chest tightening the way it did just before she spoke in class in the small town elementary school she had left 20 years ago. "No," she said. I'm just looking. I wanted to see the models." Derek's smile softened into an eagerness that dignified her politeness, then flickered. He looked vaguely above her shoulder, across the showroom, where a man in a tuxedo, security, perhaps, watched. "Of course," Derek said. "If you don't mind, would you like a brochure? We have appointments for test drives, though." She wasn't bothered by his hesitation. People hesitated at her often. Politeness mixed with a measurement. The brochure was glossy, like the paperbacks she bought at second-hand stores when she allowed herself indulgence. She wondered where she might park her life if she owned a car like this, in front of a school, in front of a river, in front of a small house with a porch she could sweep. Before she could open the brochure, another man arrived, a ribboned collar and the kind of voice that makes you think he's practiced delivering uncomfortable news. He introduced himself as Martin Voss, general sales manager. His hairline made a quiet, authoritative silhouette. His handshake was the kind reserved for people who signed checks without glancing at the amount. "We're having an exclusive event today," Martin said, eyes skimming her clothes like a weather vane. "We're restricting test drives to prospective buyers and registered guests. I'm afraid we can't accommodate browsers at the moment." Leila felt warmth leaking from her cheeks. "Oh," she said. "I didn't mean any trouble." "It's policy," Martin said. "You'll understand. We're trying to maintain the quality of the experience." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Security will escort you out if you continue to loiter." The word loitered in the space between them, as if the building itself agreed. Leila looked down at her paper list of prices. She had written them in 2-inch letters, so she wouldn't forget. It was ridiculous, she thought. She could have left quietly, gone back to the bus, to the market for tortillas. That would have been the graceful thing, to accept the rebuke and tuck the desire under her sleeve the way she tucked letters into the back of drawers. Instead, a tremor of something, anger or dignity, she couldn't decide, rose like heat. "I'm not loitering," she said. And the sentence surprised her. It came out clear as a bell. "I just want to see the cars." Martin's jaw narrowed. "Mom, I can show you to the exit. We have clients currently test driving." A woman in a silk dress glided by, an accessory to the cars, and the salesman bowed in a way that was practiced and automatic. The security man moved a step closer. Derek looked at Leela with an expression of helplessness, as if this were a small animal misstepping onto an electric road. People were watching now. Light carved their faces into small, courtly statues. Leela could have fled. Instead, she set her grocery bag down and placed one tomato on the counter. A ridiculous, human offering in a showroom of stainless steel. The tomato rolled a little, caught the fluorescence, became a small red planet. "You can't throw produce at our merchandise," Martin said, and there was laughter. A small, cruel thing like cork popping. It stung more than the proposition of being escorted out. All at once, she felt years of small humiliations swell, being told to tone it down. At work, to behave, at family reunions so her husband's business wouldn't be embarrassed, to stop asking questions. But this was different. She had come because she wanted to learn, because she had a life she was building with increments and patience, and a man in a blazer was telling her the world was not for her to peek inside. "He's right," Derek said. "I can't let you." "Fine," she said. She picked up the grocery bag, the tomato safe inside, and turned. Her throat burned. Outside, on the sidewalk under a skinny sycamore, she let herself exhale until the breath pulled like a string. When she got home, the house smelled of lemon cleaner and the faint musk of the man who had become her husband. She had married him for reasons she could still reason through in the quiet safety after a small inheritance had vanished. The chance to leave an abusive ex, a belief that someone beside her might make life steadier. His name was Matteo Calder. He was quiet at home in the way of people who were stormy at work and composed in domesticity. He kept his suits immaculate and his appointments immaculate and his face a Roman study. Soft only when he drank his coffee. He was on a late call when she entered the kitchen, his voice low and precise. "I'm not asking for charity, Jansen. I told you the terms." Lila set the groceries down, the rustle of paper a private percussion. Matteo glanced up when she hummed the old song her mother used to sing. He always liked that she hummed. He ended the call after a few minutes, practiced ease returning to his features like paint dry. "You okay?" he asked. She told him, halting, the humiliation like a bruise. She described Martin's clipped words in the showroom's light. "They told me to leave," she said. "They called me a what?" Matteo asked. And his voice had the first coolness of something that might be analysis rather than consolation. He came close, set his hand at the small of her back. "They were rude." "I'm sorry. I'm okay," she lied. She wasn't. She hadn't been okay since she was 9, and the teacher had told her story was too complicated for someone from her neighborhood. But she hadn't come to Matteo. She had always held a reserve about bringing the heat of her indignation into the house that sheltered him as well. He had enough fires to put out. That night, she went to bed with the image of the tomato rolling, the showroom laughter, lodged like gravel. Her dreams stitched together a procession of cars turned into bathtub shells. She was rowing across a sea of polished metal, her hands balled on a lemon, yellow oar. The next morning the street hummed differently. There was a rare hush at dawn, a silence the city keeps for itself. Leela walked to the bus stop, but stopped when she saw the car. It was not just a car. It was a slow thunder. The Rolls-Royce came down the block like a black tide, molten glass swallowing morning. Its hood ornament, little man, arms outstretched, caught the light like a hollow. The driver wore white gloves, and the car coasted to a precise stop outside their house. Neighbors peeked out from curtains. A dog started and started again. Leela felt the world tilt. The car doors opened in a manner that obeyed choreography, and Mateo stepped out. There was a moment of private radio between them. He saw her, and the line between them shifted, as if the two had been pulled taut and someone had plucked the string. "Mateo," she called. The sound of her name in his mouth was a mapping. This is where home started. He walked toward her, his palms empty, his suit impeccable. Dressed like a god of commerce, he still moved with a domestic ease. He reached the stoop and stopped, and for a breath the two of them regarded each other like strangers leaning into a memory. "I had them bring it," he said softly. "I thought." His voice halted as if he'd rehearsed several lines and chosen none. "I thought you might like to see it up close." Lila looked at the car and then back at him. The moment felt staged, the way his hand rested on the door, the way the chauffeur waited like a bowed head. "For me?" she asked. "For you?" he said. "For us." Neighbors came into the street. Someone shouted, "Wow!" The Rolls was a proclamation. It took money and the ability to command beauty with a phone call. Leela's cheeks heated. She understood the message. He would fix anything with scale. He would respond to the humiliation she endured by bringing a retort large enough to hush the town. He had shown her, in the language he knew, that she would not be disrespected. But the gesture, for all its splendor, carried a weight Leela had not bargained for. The Rolls addressed the public first eye, look at who she belongs to. It asked everyone to rewrite her into a headline. She felt the pressure of being proof. Evidence of his success, rather than a subject with her own interior life. People pointed and cataloged the change without asking how it had landed on her. The car was a trophy, and trophies have a way of glinting without context. Mateo, sensing the shift, offered her a hand. "Come," he said. "We'll go for a drive." She could see that part of him was offering an apology, a redress. Another part, pragmatic and territorial, wanted the world to witness his solution. Leela took his hand, and they descended into the leather interior, the car swallowing them like a velvet theater. "I didn't want them to make you feel small," Mateo said. He placed his fingers along the seam of her palm like a map. "I know how that feels." "It wasn't your fault," she said. The truth resized itself in her mouth. She was grateful. That gratitude, complicated and raw, tasted of iron and honey. But it wasn't theirs to fix either. He glanced at her, startled. "What do you mean?" "You can't buy away how they saw me," she said. "You can buy a car, Mateo. You can buy anything that will turn their heads for a day. But you can't buy the right for me to enter that room and be treated like everyone else without being announced." Silence expanded between them like a cathedral's nave. The Rolls glided through the city, and the driver, obedient to a script, kept to the lanes, a carriage on a parade route. They drove past the dealership. The glass sparkled. Through it, salesmen and customers shimmered like fish. Leela watched faces, Martin's impassive mouth, Derek's practiced kindness, and understood how easily a single building could divide a life into before and after. "When I was a boy," Mateo said, his voice a distant lever, "I never wanted to be in the room where things were decided. I wanted to hold the ledger. People like me, people who work in numbers, think we can solve everything with larger numbers." Leela looked at him. He spoke with the cadence of someone who had made peace with being powerful, who'd learned economics as a language of control. "And it's not that simple," she replied. "Numbers don't change how you feel in a moment that cuts you." They stopped at a small cafe, a corner of the city that seemed to have been missed by the architects of luxury. Mateo stepped out and paid the bill without a blink. The owner, an old friend of Leela's named Rosa, gave him a polite, analyzing nod. Rosa had been Leela's neighbor for years, who once recommended her for a late, night cleaning job and had given her the courage to enroll in night classes. Rosa, Leela said, and the name was a softening. They sat at a cracked table, and Matteo watched her, as if he were both assessing and learning. Why did you bring the rolls? Leela asked finally, not with accusation but with need. She wanted to know the script behind the spectacle. He hesitated. Because when I heard what happened, he stopped. And because I wanted you to be able to see what belongs to you. I didn't want you to have to imagine. It belongs to us, she said. It belongs to me, he corrected, with the peculiar ferocity of ownership. And I wanted to give it to you. Lila felt the shape of the word give like a slab of ice. It slid in her hand, but left a trace. I don't want things given at the cost of the world's assumption that I'm something I am not, she said. I want my right to walk into a showroom because I chose to be there. I want to spend my money, or my time, or my damn tears without being moved like a pawn to make you look magnanimous. He studied her face, and in that study she saw a flicker of unsettlement. Then do it differently, he said, sudden and urgent. Tell me how you'd like that to be. It was the first time in years he had not simply decided. For a moment, Leela allowed herself to imagine her name on an envelope. Leela Navarro, a dealership appointment made under her account. Her credit discussed and accepted. A salesperson who assumed she had the capacity to buy rather than the face of someone who must be grateful. I want you to help me, she said, and the words were an offering that carried both a map and a minefield. Not by presenting me with things. Help me learn how the world is ordered so I can build my own standing in it. Help me become a person who makes decisions because we are partners, not because I am proof. Matteo took a breath that tasted like confession. I thought love meant making things easier for you, he said. I never thought that doing so would silence you. I see now that my largesse, out of love, has been a kind of erasure. They sat under the cafe's small awning and planned. Not numbers, but appointments, a finance advisor who would explain lines of credit without condescension, a small class in auto mechanics so she could know cars by the way engines spoke instead of how they shone, a meeting with a local dealership manager arranged in advance under Leela's name. It was an answer that suited both of them. It was also a beginning of work neither had wanted to do before. At the dealership, their next day's appointment began with Martin's surprise when he saw Leela's name on the reservation book. He had the habit of measuring worth by clothing and the car people she was with. When Leela walked into the showroom that afternoon, Matteo deliberately stayed in the periphery. Derek was on the floor, polishing. Martin's expression was a cross between annoyance and curiosity. Ms. Navarro, Martin said. I didn't expect you back. I made an appointment, she replied. Her voice was steady. She felt like someone who had been given a script and then rewritten it for herself. The test drive coordinator offered a set of keys. Leela took them. The leather was warm under her palm, and for the first time she noticed how the smell of a car smelled like closed worlds and open invitations combined. Derek, seeing her with the keys, brightened, as if he'd been waiting for the scene where he could play a helpful role. They drove. Leela learned to listen to the car in a new language, to the way the engine thrummed like a tuned heart, to the gentle conversation of gears, to the confidence cars behaved in when someone treated them with ownership instead of awe. When they returned, Martin's face had softened into something like respect. It was not total. He still had his ledger and his ways. But he had been shown that assumptions could be inaccurate. Words spread in small increments in the sales floor's corner cigarette breaks, among the service attendants who checked tire pressures. Leela found herself answering questions from curious young women who joked about the audacity of a housewife wanting to know about torque. She told them, simply, I wanted to understand. I wanted to be able to speak their language. Back at home, the roles remained. Automobile and artifact. It became a teaching instrument, a place where Matteo and Lila learned each other's languages with less friction and more curiosity. He learned to pause before solving with spectacle. She learned to ask for tools rather than displays. They argued, earnest and sometimes angry conversations about dignity and assumptions. But at the center of them lay a new radical. Neither of them wanted the other to be rendered invisible. A secondary thread tugged through the story. Derek, the young salesman, who had been the first to offer the brochure, and then the soft complicity in the insult. Watching Leela on the showroom floor, challenged in learning, he felt a dissonance. He had been taught to read people and to decide how much attention to pay them. Over weeks, he found himself sidling up to customers to ask about their lives, to listen with a patience that was a kind of repentance. Perhaps the world shifts not because billionaires deliver sweeping gestures, but because small among them let their scripts be rewritten. The climax came on a rain-soaked afternoon when Martin, public figure of the dealership's face, was accused of discriminating against a customer who did not fit his ideal of worth. Leela was there by happenstance, returning to pick up a leaf-shaped air freshener she'd liked. The accused customer was a young man, dark and quiet, with a history of patchwork employment. Martin's dismissive tone flared. The exchange grew heated. Leela stepped forward not to lead, but to sit between them, a small placard of calm. "Let him talk," she said. "He wants to buy a car. Ask him what he needs." Martin's face reddened with old habits. "We have standards," he said. "We have customers," she replied. "We have people. Standards are for credit committees, not for deciding who is worthy of being heard." That was not the speech that made the room still. The stillness came when Derek, the once bright smile, stepped up and asked the man a question about his job, and then another, and then took a piece of paper to write down follow-up steps. The rest of the staff leaned in. Martin watched the ripple until it reached his jaw and he swallowed. In the weeks that followed, the dealership changed in small, practical ways. A customer relations workshop, updated training on implicit bias, a revised policy to encourage genuine listening. Leela was asked to be a part of a short focus group, an absurd phrase for the woman who hadn't wanted to be announced, and now found herself narrating small humiliations to investigate systemic correction. She accepted, not for the accolade, but because change required someone present to tell what it had been like. Things did not become perfect. Power has long shadows. There were times when the role's presence at the curb became a shorthand for the couple's altered class status. There were mutterings at neighborhood doors. But Leela had become more than a subject of spectacle. She had acquired language, confidence, and boundaries. She could meet a man like Martin and not feel the old collapse. She could tell Matteo when his gifts felt like corruptions. The story reached a quiet resolution in autumn when leaves littered their walkway like translated money, small, beautiful, inevitable. Matteo had arranged, at last, to sell the rolls. Not because he regretted it. He didn't. But because the car had served its purpose. He'd started with a display and ended with a lesson. He wanted what remained to be his wife's choice, not his declaration. On the day the rolls left, Derek was there, helping, oddly ceremonious. Martin watched at a distance, his expression complicated loss, maybe, for a toy he'd envied and judged. Rosa baked a small cake and left it on their porch. Neighbors came to wave, not in spectacle, but in the humane way people wave at someone who has emerged bruised and unbowed. Leela stood on the stoop as the chauffeur closed the door for the last time. The little man, hood ornament, flashed once as the car started, as if blinking goodbye. She felt a tide of feelings: relief, curious emptiness, gratitude, pride, and a small, steady thread of fear. The fear that the world would revert to the old calculus without vigilance. Matteo came to stand beside her. He did not hold out a hand with a new token or promise. Instead, he took off his jacket and draped it across the back of a chair on the porch, as if preparing the seat for her. "Where will you go now?" he asked, because he was learning to ask instead of decide. Leela considered the question. For a long time, she had measured her route by the bus lines, the grocery, the night school. She had wanted more, to be fluent in the grammar of high ceilings and low engines, to know prices and torque and contracts. She had wanted to be visible without being rewritten. "Wherever I choose," she said. "Maybe back to school. Maybe the small repair shop down on Ninth. Maybe I'll teach a class at the community center about buying cars. How to know the difference between a salesman and a friend. Maybe I'll be content to sip coffee on the porch. The point is, it's my choice now." They watched the Rolls recede, its taillights like small, departing planets. The sound of its engine faded, and the neighborhood resumed its ordinary conversations. Leela felt lighter, not because the car had gone, but because she had moved through something and come out the other side with the power to name what she wanted. At night, when the house settled and Matteo slept in the soundless austerity of someone, without alarms, Leela sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and a notebook. She wrote down the words she would say when she taught the class, the phrases she would use to ask for credit responsibly, the sentences she would refuse loudly. She wrote, too, a smaller list. Appointments with Matteo, 2 times a month, to remind him to pause before deciding for her. They were grateful dates, like anniversaries of small reforms. The Rolls had been a spectacle. It had been a public correction and private provocation. It had shown a way to obliterate humiliation with scale and, in the process, invited a better question. What does it mean to defend someone without erasing them? For Leela, the answer had become a practice. An ongoing, sometimes messy, negotiation between being loved and being erased. She learned that empowerment is not always a single grand gesture, but many small, stubborn acts. Asking the question at the dealership, walking back in after being pushed out, telling the husband that gifts, when misapplied, can bruise as much as a shove. Her life continued, stripped neither of its ordinary disappointments nor its small triumphs. She taught a Class 1 winter night at the community center. 10 people came, and others listened on the phone. Derek signed up for more listening lessons at the dealership. Martin finally apologized to the young man who had been dismissed and started a modest scholarship for apprentices. Rosa opened a second cafe, painted yellow. Matteo sold the Rolls and bought instead a small, modest car that fit their grocery bags with ease. One evening, some months later, Leela walked past a dealership window. She saw herself reflected, plain clothes, a woman's hands in motion, a look in her eyes that once would have been apologetic. She felt, with the slow satisfaction of coffee coming to boil, like someone who had learned a new language and found she had always had the accent she needed. The world would keep measuring people in its old ways. It would keep making swift decisions and the kind of justice that sounds like a headline. But in their house, on a street that had seen the passing of a black Rolls and the light it through, Leela had learned something more useful: how to make her own definitions, how to claim a place at the table without apology, and how to let a gesture be a beginning rather than the whole story. Sometimes, late, she hummed the same song her mother had sung when she was little. Matteo listened, and, when she paused, he would always ask, "Sing it again." She would, because she had become the keeper of her own music. The Rolls had been only one note in a long melody. The rest of the music, she now knew, would be made by them both. Sometimes harmonizing, sometimes disagreeing, always tuned to a new, chosen rhythm.